Why does a plane bathroom still have an ashtray, even though smoking has been banned for decades? And why are there black triangles above certain seats? Most people assume these details are random. They're not. Some are there for safety, some are there for inspections, and some only matter when something goes wrong. Once you understand them, the cabin stops looking ordinary and starts looking like what it really is, a machine packed with quiet backup plans. So in this video, we're breaking down 20 airplane features you've probably seen before without ever knowing why they're there, and a few of them matter a lot more than you'd expect. Let's start with one of the easiest details to miss and one of the most deliberate, those little black triangles above certain windows. Have you ever had a window seat with a little black triangle above it? If so, you may have ended up at one of the windows the crew can use as a visual reference. That marker helps flight attendants find the right window fast when they need a clear look at the wing. From that angle, they can quickly check the part of the wing they need to see if something looks off. And that's why the triangle is placed so precisely. It's not there for the passenger in that seat, it's there so the crew can go straight to the right view instead of wasting time searching for it. Now, look a few inches to the side, because the airplane window has a tiny hole in it, and that one sounds like a design mistake until you hear what it actually does. The first time I flew and noticed that tiny hole in the airplane window, I honestly thought, wait, that can't be right. A hole in a window at 35,000 feet feels like the kind of detail you'd rather not discover mid-flight. So I looked into it. And it turns out that hole is supposed to be there. Airplane windows aren't just one solid piece. They're built in layers. Think of it like a window sandwich, and that tiny hole in the middle layer helps the whole system work. The cabin is pressurized. Outside air is a completely different story. That opening helps balance pressure between the layers, so the outer pane takes most of the load, exactly what it was designed to do. It also helps keep moisture from building up between the panes, so your window is less likely to fog up while you're trying to look outside. So the tiny detail that looks the most suspicious is actually one of the reasons the window works so well in the first place. And the window isn't the only part of the cabin hiding a smart design choice. There's another one right above your head, and it only really matters when the plane starts shaking. You know that moment when someone's coming down the aisle, the plane gives one sharp jolt, and their hand lands right on the top of your seat? Best case, your headrest gets yanked. Worst case, so does your hair. It happens for a simple reason. When people lose their balance in the aisle, they grab whatever is closest. But on some planes, there's actually something else there for exactly that problem. Look under the overhead bin, and you may spot a slim rail running along the bottom. Flight attendants use it to steady themselves as they move through the cabin, especially when turbulence hits without warning. And if you're already up, maybe coming back from the lavatory when the cabin gets bumpy, that rail is a much better thing to reach for than somebody else's seat. It's a small detail, but it shows how much thought goes into airplane design. Even the parts passengers barely notice are there to help people stay upright when the cabin suddenly gets rough. Aisle seats already win for one simple reason. When you need to get up, you're not trapped. But on some planes, that seat comes with a small bonus almost nobody talks about. Near the lower hinge of the armrest, there may be a tiny hidden button. Press it, and the armrest lifts up. It's mainly there to make the row easier to access, especially when the space is tight and the seat in front is already reclined. And if you end up with an empty row, lifting that armrest can make it a lot easier to shift around, stretch out, and get a little more comfortable. Just don't leave it that way for the whole flight. During takeoff and landing, crews may require that aisle armrest to be back down for safety. Now, speaking of things on a plane that look slightly out of place, have you ever looked out at the wing and wondered why there are small anchor points sticking up on a surface that's supposed to be perfectly smooth? If you've ever had a clear view of the wing, you may have noticed a few small hooks sticking up from the surface. And at first glance, they look completely out of place. Wings are supposed to be smooth, clean, built to move through the air with as little resistance as possible. So why would anything be sticking up out there? Because in an evacuation, that smooth surface becomes a problem. If passengers ever have to get out through an overwing exit, lifelines can be attached to those anchor points to help people steady themselves as they move across the wing. And in a ditching or any situation where that surface is slippery or unstable, that small detail can make a very big difference. Those fittings are there for a moment no one wants, but everyone wants the airplane to be ready for. And just a bit farther back on the wing, there's another detail people see all the time and almost always misidentify: the tiny whisker-like pieces that look like antennas. From a window seat, those stick-like pieces along the back edge of the wing are easy to misread. A lot of people assume they're some kind of antenna. They're not. They're called static wicks, and they help dissipate built-up static charge while the airplane is in flight. As the aircraft moves through the air, electrical charge can build up on the surface. If that charge isn't discharged in a controlled way, it can interfere with radio communication and avionics. That's why those thin pieces sit along the trailing edge of the wing. They give that charge a controlled way to discharge instead of letting it build up and create interference. It's the kind of part you'd never think about, but it matters the whole time the aircraft is flying. And just ahead of that, there's another feature people notice all the time without knowing what it actually tells you: the white spiral on the front of the engine. When a plane is on the ground, being anywhere near a running engine is a dangerous place to be. And that's exactly why the white spiral on the front of the engine matters. From a distance, that spiral makes it much easier for ground crews to tell whether the engine is turning. Without it, the fan can be harder to read than people expect, especially in certain light or at certain speeds. That creates a real risk for anyone working nearby after landing or before departure. So the spiral is not there to make the engine look sharper or more distinctive. It's there as a warning cue, a fast visual signal that says the engine is operating. It's such a simple piece of design, but it protects the people who work closest to the aircraft. And once you move from the engine to the rest of the plane, there's another detail that seems purely cosmetic until you realize it solves several practical problems at once. Why so many airplanes are painted white. You could fly for years and never stop to question this one. Why are so many commercial airplanes white? It's not just a branding choice. And it's definitely not because airlines all have the same taste. White makes practical sense. On the ground, it reflects heat better than darker colors, which helps keep the aircraft from soaking up as much sunlight while it's parked out on the ramp. And since planes can spend long stretches sitting in direct sun, that adds up. It also makes maintenance easier. Leaks, dents, and other visible surface damage are easier to spot on a lighter exterior, which gives technicians a clearer view when they inspect the aircraft. And as a bonus, white tends to show fading less aggressively over time than darker paint does. So even something as ordinary as the paint color is part of the airplane's design logic. And now we get to the features that feel the most contradictory, because some of the clearest signs of airplane safety are the ones that only exist in case a passenger ignores the rules. If smoking has been banned on planes for decades, then why is there still an ashtray in the lavatory? Because it's not there to allow smoking, it is there because airplane design plans for the person who breaks the rule anyway. US regulations still require lavatories to have a self-contained ashtray placed conspicuously on or near the entry side of the door, even though smoking in the lavatory is prohibited. And once you hear the logic, it makes uncomfortable sense. If someone sneaks a cigarette in there, the last thing anyone wants is for it to end up in a waste bin full of flammable trash. The ashtray gives that person a safe, obvious place to put it out, which helps reduce the risk of a fire starting in one of the worst places on the airplane for that to happen. FAA has explained the requirement in exactly that spirit, to provide a safe, convenient, and obvious place to dispose of smoking material. So the ashtray is really a backup plan for bad decisions. Airplane design does not depend on perfect behavior. It also plans for the moment somebody does the exact thing they were told not to do, and that same mindset shows up all over the lavatory, because behind that little door, there are more safety features built in than most people expect. The airplane lavatory feels private, right up until you imagine the wrong kind of emergency happening behind a locked door. Someone faints, someone gets seriously sick, someone stops responding. That is the situation this part of the plane is really designed for. On many aircraft, crew members can unlock the lavatory from the outside in an emergency, so they are not stuck waiting if a passenger inside needs immediate help. There's also a call button inside, giving someone a way to alert the crew if something starts going wrong behind that closed door. And the lavatory can also be taken out of service if needed, which is why you sometimes see one closed off during a flight. But you know what else almost every passenger notices without really thinking about it? Why the cabin lights get dimmed during takeoff and landing. Have you ever noticed that right before takeoff and again before landing, the cabin lights get dimmer? I bet a lot of people watching assumed it was just to save electricity. It's not. The real reason is emergency readiness. If something goes wrong in low light, the last thing anyone wants is for passengers and crew to be hit with darkness all at once after sitting in a brightly lit cabin. Airplanes are equipped with emergency lighting that is armed or turned on during taxi, takeoff, and landing, and they also have floor-level escape path markings to help people find their way out if normal cabin lighting is unavailable or obscured. So by dimming the cabin ahead of time, the crew is giving your eyes a chance to adjust before those first few seconds ever become critical. And the next feature is another perfect example of something passengers see in every pre-flight briefing and still picture the wrong way: the oxygen masks above your seat. By the time the safety demo gets to the oxygen masks, a lot of people are already half paying attention, which is unfortunate because this is one of the most misunderstood systems on the plane. A lot of passengers picture the same setup: one tiny oxygen tank for every seat tucked somewhere above their head. That's usually not how it works. On many commercial aircraft, the masks drop from the passenger service unit above your seat, and the oxygen often comes from chemical oxygen generators or another centralized oxygen source, rather than a tiny personal tank for each passenger. And on aircraft certified to operate above 30,000 feet, those masks must be presented automatically before the cabin pressure altitude exceeds 15,000 feet. So the mask is really just the part you see. Behind it is an emergency system built to react fast, buy time, and keep passengers supplied with oxygen while the pilots get the airplane down to a safer altitude. Pulling the mask down helps start the oxygen flow. And if emergency gear is hiding right above your seat, the next one is usually tucked much farther out of sight: the medical equipment on board that only becomes visible when someone really needs help. If someone has a serious medical emergency at 35,000 feet, the crew cannot exactly pull over and wait for help. That's why commercial planes carry more medical gear than most passengers ever realize. Under US Part 121 rules, passenger-carrying airplanes must have first aid kits on board. If the aircraft requires a flight attendant, it also has to carry an emergency medical kit. And on larger Part 121 aircraft, an approved AED is required too. You usually don't see any of it during boarding, and that's part of the point. The equipment has to be ready, accessible, and clearly identified. But it doesn't need to be sitting out where passengers are staring at it the whole flight. So, if a medical emergency starts unfolding in the air, the plane is not starting from zero. The gear to respond is already on board, already checked, and already meant to be used fast. And not every onboard emergency is medical. Sometimes the problem is a passenger who is very much awake, very loud, and very much out of control. Not every emergency on board is mechanical or medical. Sometimes the problem is human, and sometimes it turns dangerous fast. A passenger starts yelling at the crew, refuses instructions, gets aggressive, and suddenly the issue is no longer comfort or customer service. It is control. That is why flight attendants are trained to deal with disruptive passengers, starting with verbal de-escalation whenever possible. The FAA treats unruly behavior as a serious threat because even one out-of-control passenger can distract the crew and interfere with the safe operation of the flight. And if talking the situation down stops working, some operators have restraint equipment on board for exactly that kind of moment. So this is one of those things passengers hope never gets used, but most people are still glad it exists. Up to this point, we've been talking about features built for the moments passengers might actually notice, But the next group is different, because some of the most important systems on a long flight are working in places passengers almost never see. If you've ever made it through a long-haul flight, then you know how wrecked your body can feel by the end. And every time I've been on one of those flights, I've had the same thought. If I feel this bad as a passenger, how are flight attendants still taking care of a full cabin? And how are pilots still sharp enough to land the plane safely? Thankfully, they're not just powering through. On some long-range aircraft, part of the airplane is built just for the crew to rest in flight. These rest areas are usually tucked away from the passenger cabin, and on newer long-haul jets, they can be full bunk compartments hidden above the ceiling or elsewhere inside the aircraft. On other planes, the setup is simpler. Sometimes it is closer to an approved rest seat than a separate room. Either way, the point is the same. On very long flights, crew rest is built into the operation. Most passengers never notice these spaces at all, even when they are surprisingly close by. And that's only part of it. The rest of the system lives in the rules airlines follow to keep pilots sharp when the timing matters most. And that's exactly what I'm getting into next. Before a pilot ever gets near the runway, there are already layers of rules in place. Pilots have to stay medically certified, and they also have to report fit for duty. On top of that, flight crew rest rules are strict. Before duty starts, they need a required rest period long enough to give them a real chance to sleep, not just sit around feeling tired in a hotel room. That matters even more on those very long flights. You know, the ones where 2 pilots just aren't enough. So airlines may put extra pilots on board for long-haul routes, with crews rotating through rest periods instead of trying to stay sharp for the entire flight in one stretch. That is where those hidden crew rest spaces start making a lot more sense. And then there is one more layer people love hearing about because it sounds almost too specific to be real. On many airlines, cockpit meal procedures are designed to reduce the chance of both pilots eating the exact same thing at the exact same time. The idea is simple. If food ever becomes a problem, you do not want it becoming the same problem for both pilots at once. So the calm voice from the cockpit is not just about experience. It is also the result of a system built to protect alertness before tiredness ever gets the chance to take over. And sitting right in front of that whole system is the next feature, the cockpit door, which is doing far more than simply separating the front of the plane from the back. Before 9/11, the cockpit door was literally just a door. After 9/11, it became one of the most serious security features on the airplane. On certain commercial aircraft, FAA rules require the flight deck door and surrounding boundary to be heavily reinforced. It has to resist forcible intrusion, withstand heavy impact, and even resist ballistic penetration. Yeah, it's built to keep the wrong people out no matter what. And the protection does not stop with the door itself. Anytime that area has to be opened, it is handled carefully. Operators use controlled procedures, and on many aircraft, the pilots can check who is outside through a viewing port, a visual surveillance system, or other security tools before that door opens. So, what looks ordinary from row 3 or 4 is not functioning like an ordinary doorway at all. It is being treated like a controlled security zone at the front of the airplane. And once you realize the cockpit is its own protected world, the next detail feels almost unreal. Even the windows up there have their own heating system. Try picturing this for a second. You're flying through icing conditions, and the windshield in front of the pilot starts clouding or icing over. That's why cockpit windshields on many aircraft have their own built-in heating and anti-ice system. This isn't some fancy comfort upgrade. FAA rules actually require it. The plane must be able to keep a clear section of the windshield no matter how bad the icing gets outside. Think about it, when you're lining up with the runway in bad weather, the pilots cannot lose that view for even 1 second. So those windows are actively being heated the whole flight, purely for safety. And if the anti-ice system ever goes down, the airline can't even dispatch the plane into known icing conditions. That's how critical it is. And if even one cockpit windshield needs its own protection system, imagine how much wiring and hidden hardware is running through the rest of the airplane. A modern airliner doesn't just have wires in it. It is full of them, running through the fuselage, the ceiling, the floor, behind panels, and systems passengers never think about. By the time you board, all of that is already quietly doing its job. The seatbelt sign turns on, the cabin lights work. Screens, sensors, alerts, and communication systems all depend on that hidden network. Boeing says the 787 Dreamliner alone has about 60 to 70 miles of wires. So when a flight feels smooth and effortless from your seat, a big part of that feeling comes from hardware you never see. And when you realize how much power and signal is moving through the airplane, the next question gets a lot more interesting. What actually happens when lightning hits it? People love imagining lightning hitting a plane like it's the opening scene of some disaster movie. But if that ever happens on your flight, the real story is a lot less dramatic than that. Planes do get struck by lightning more often than most passengers think. Airbus says the average jet gets hit at least once a year. Modern airplanes are built to withstand that. The outer skin channels the electricity straight through and out the other side, while all the critical systems stay protected. So if a plane is struck, you might hear a bang, see a flash, or sometimes feel absolutely nothing at all. But the strike itself is not the same thing as the airplane losing control. Next time you're sitting on a long-haul flight and everything feels perfectly calm and effortless, now you know exactly why. And one more thing people love to misread in the sky is those long white trails behind a plane. A lot of people assume those white streaks are fuel or chemicals being sprayed into the air. They're not. The real explanation is much less dramatic. Think about what happens when you step outside on a freezing day and see your breath. That's basically the same idea. At cruising altitude, the air outside can be around -40 to -50 degrees Celsius, while jet exhaust comes out extremely hot after fuel is burned. When that hot exhaust hits that freezing air, the moisture condenses and freezes into tiny ice crystals. That's what creates those visible white trails in the sky. So one of the strangest looking things about air travel is really just heat, moisture, and cold air colliding at 35,000 feet. A commercial airplane is full of tiny design choices that only make sense once you realize how much of flying depends on preparation, safety, and backup plans. And the smartest features are usually the ones passengers barely notice. If you learned something new today, hit like and tell me in the comments which one of these hidden airplane features surprised you the most. And if you want more videos that make flying make a lot more sense, subscribe and turn on notifications. Safe travels, and I'll see you on the next flight.